Mana System, Hello, World. By M.J. Markgrove. Chapter 161, In Charge. You seem awfully nonplussed for someone that just murdered a group of people, Kurt angrily replied as he glared at me. I had just finished going over what had occurred with the Stygian Order base with him and Martin. I hadn't expected the man to get so up in arms about it, but I guess I shouldn't have been too surprised. He did capitulate to a bunch of thugs instead of gathering his officers and driving them off. I think he still had that pre-system mindset that killing people should result in my arrest. It would be pretty funny if he tried. Well, funny for me maybe. Have you ever had to kill another human being? I asked instead of just ignoring the man's ignorant assertion. I watched him flounder as his mouth worked uselessly for a bit. Eventually, he turned away before replying. No. Then you have no qualifications to judge my actions. I don't kill because I enjoy it, I do it because it is necessary. Over the last year, I have had to kill more people than I care to count. You may think I'm cold or heartless, fine, but I will reserve my emotions for those that deserve it. I will not lose any sleep over killing thugs and murderers that forced my hand with their actions. Kurt refused to make eye contact after my little speech, probably because he knew I was right. He would learn eventually. Getting worked up over killing a thug or someone who wanted you dead was just not worth it. Perhaps we got a bit off track, Martin cut in. We know there were at least 6 spies within the city. Paul, you said you spotted 5 of them within the outpost. Yeah, Kurt replied. Good, that means the sheriff's forces managed to capture the final member. He is locked in that room you designed, Paul. I nodded at that. The room was a prison cell meant to hold enhanced people. Similar to what Lord Victi had held that Michael person in. Only, it was powered by runes instead of enchantments. Kurt finally spoke up. Surprisingly, it seems to be holding him. He had some form of earth magic as his escape method of choice, but with the enhancements you made around town, he wasn't able to flee like he thought and we eventually captured him. I ignored Kit's jibe. Has he talked at all? I asked instead, glossing over the previous disagreement we had. Kurt shook his head. The man refuses to speak. We have only done basic questioning though. I grunted in acknowledgement. I doubt you will get anything out of him. Which leaves you with only 2 choices, kill him or let him go. Keeping him for too long could result in him finding a way to escape. Kit's face grew grim when he heard me say this. I realized he must have known these were the only 2 choices. Maybe that's why he was so disagreeable about my killing, because he knew he had to make the same hard choice soon. That decision can wait for the new mayor, Martin added, defusing the tense situation. You wanted to meet with us to discuss something specific. I wanted to roll my eyes knowing Martin was likely to be the new mayor, but I resisted the temptation. There wasn't anyone even close to as popular as him within the city. I wanted to discuss arming the walls with mana cannons. Martin quirked an eyebrow. What are mana cannons? Kurt asked. Well, I asked you 2 out to the edge of the city to demonstrate. First we need a target, I replied, glancing at the lifeless stretch of barren rock in front of us. We were past the walls on the north end of the plateau that the city rested upon. I scanned around until I spotted one of the ubiquitous rock elementals. If it wasn't for my high perception, I may have missed its resting form amongst the other boulders. There's one, I said, pointing to the unassuming rock pile. Kurt looked over and grunted in annoyance, pulling his weapon and getting ready to kill the creature. Martin waved him off. We're here for a demonstration, remember? Kurt lowered his blade but didn't sheath it. It was a smart move in case something did go wrong. All right, I said, watch closely. The active camouflage disguising my prosthetic hand faded away as it cracked open, extending the containment array. While Kurt didn't say anything, I could see the surprise on his face. I aimed the hand, which was made so much easier thanks to the runes built into it. A targeting marker only visible to me settled on the pile of rocks and I fired. There was a streak of white energy as the mana burst from my weapon. When it impacted the elemental, it exploded, sending a shower of rocks and debris flying everywhere. A shimmering dome encapsulated the 3 of us, thanks to Martin, and the rocks and pebbles bounced harmlessly away. That is a mana cannon, and a low-power one at that, I stated. Kurt was speechless for a bit as he examined the crater in the distance. And you wanna arm the city with these? Why? Do you remember when I said you had a rare thing here? Yeah, I remember, the man grumbled. Well, there are going to be people who want to take that from you. Walls are good and all to keep monsters away, but the real monsters are people and those from other worlds that covet what exists here. They will also covet what I have given you. I knew I should have told you to fuck off, he complained. That wouldn't have mattered and you know it. Someone would still eventually desire your town for their own. And maybe this time you wouldn't get lucky by just becoming a lackey. I could see the man's bald fist turn white as he clenched them, but he held his tongue. All right, you made your point. What do you want for the weapons, and how many can you offer? I can only offer 10 at the moment, but they will be an upgrade over normal monocannons. I call them monolasers. The effect is similar but more focused, so it uses less power per shot. Seems too good to be true. What's the catch? Kurt asked. They are expensive to make. The city will need to supply the materials to construct them, and I will waive the price for the first 10. If we are supplying all the materials, why should we be paying anything? Kurt demanded. If you know anyone else capable of producing these weapons, feel free to ask them. Hell, I would be surprised if you could even find someone within the bazaar willing to sell a monocannon to you. They are apparently reserved for royalty and dwarves. If they are so rare, how did you learn about them? He shot back. I acquired them from a dwarven enclave we were forced to eliminate. But those were sold off, although I did copy the design, and save a few for myself. So your damnable flying stone is armed, he grunted. I knew it. I didn't deny the accusation, knowing he would have found out soon or later anyway. The man was rather irrational at times, but he wasn't a fool. Well? I asked, do you want them or not? Kurt was about to go on another tirade when Martin pulled him off to the side and spoke quietly in his ear. When they returned, an agreement was made and we shook hands over the deal. Over the next 2 weeks, I would be supplied with all the materials I needed to produce the 10 weapons. After that, I would leave town for an extended time to level. That man doesn't like you much, Martin stated as soon as Kurt was out of sight. Gee, what gave you that opinion? I deadpanned. You should make a token effort not to make everyone dislike you, Martin replied. Anyway, I hear you are stealing my girlfriend. What's that all about? I guess you just aren't man enough for her, I replied with a smile. He chuckled. But seriously, I need to level and so does she. We all do, but you are needed here and Ska seems to have decided that being a city guard is his calling. Yeah, I'm aware. Maybe when all this nonsense settles down I can get out more. I am still joining a few of the patrols, so it isn't like I have stopped leveling completely. Who knows, I may even hit level 19 before you return. Fiona wanted to thank you for her recent level. She can now hold her human form for 6 hours. Really, I hadn't realized it made that much of a change. Well, it certainly did. I haven't seen her this happy in a long time. It's why I'm not more worried about her running off with you to level. Maybe when she hits level 20 she can retake her physical form permanently. I only nodded. I didn't want to get his hopes up in case that didn't occur. It's good that everyone is happy. I know losing Houston and the Alliance was a major blow for you. Martin sighed. It isn't a complete loss. Carlson Hornwell took over to try and keep everything together in the meantime. But having Houston sitting in the center and controlling the bazaar does hurt. Vegas denied our request to use their bazaar, despite your help. So far no other teams have located another bazaar on that side of the spine. They seemed to crop up in areas where large volumes of people had lived, but the northwest of the US was rather sparsely populated. That's not good. We seem to be slowly losing access to more and more bazaars. I know there is one in Mexico City, but that place was a war zone when I passed by. That leaves the few merchants traveling up to Nashville as the only ones that still have access to a bazaar. Make sure they know not to mention ties with me or they could lose that as well. I will do some more scouting while Fiona and I level. Maybe we'll get lucky and find something. Martin nodded but didn't look wholly convinced. I couldn't blame him. It wasn't like these buildings just popped up in every city. I spent the rest of the week churning out the new weapons for St. June's defense. With those, the shield, and the wall, it wasn't likely anyone without significant time and resources could break into the city. I overestimated the amount of mithril I required because there were some other items I was making that I had told nobody about. They wouldn't be ready anytime soon anyway. But there was one item. I walked up the stairs of the central spire. It was the energy emitter for all the shield towers on the walls. Nobody had seen me enter, and that was for the best. Scanning the room with my tattoo, I made sure nobody was hiding on the top floor. The small area was devoid of anyone and I squeezed into the space. Nobody had reason to come up here as the command and control was on the ground floor, but it was left by the earth mages per my design. I ran my fingers across the low ceiling in a pattern. Glowing lines spread across the ceiling and a panel lowered, giving me access to the runic structure within. I took out the large and awkward plate from my ring and moved it into the opening. Once it was in place, the lines flashed, letting me know it was inserted properly. I pushed the ceiling back in place and resecured the panel. With that new item installed, the entire city inside the walls now acted as an improved teleportation scrambler even if the shield was offline. It would also ping an alert to the command center and focus attention on the individual that attempted to enter the city. I had already told Martin and Kurt about adding this feature when I delivered the monolasers. Kurt was a bit less grumpy when he witnessed a demonstration of the new weapons. He still didn't fully trust me though. While I thought he was an idiot, I could understand his concern. I was essentially responsible for the entirety of the city's defensive measures. Putting all that on one person meant it could all be taken away or subverted by that person. I had no way to assuage his worries though. I had built-in measures to see that none of these items could be used against me or the fortress. I wasn't going to tell him that though. The rest of my time was spent restocking the fortress and fixing some items I had neglected to fix. In the morning Fiona and I would head off and we may not return for months. I knew Martin worried about Fiona, but I think I worried more about what might happen to the city in my absence. But I couldn't sit idle any longer and I had faith that the city could withstand an assault if it came to that. Chapter 162, Keeping Up with the Joneses. I dodged to the side as the Gorelephant rushed through the space I had just been occupying, trying to gore me with its horn. I heard the creature let out a deafening screech as Fiona let loose with the prismatic rapier. The creature's tough hide parted like thin paper to the blade's edge and ability to nullify magic. Learning that their tough hide wasn't just thick but also magical had come as a bit of a shock, but it explained why it had been so hard to take them down in our previous attempt. Using the distraction, I hauled my staff back and swung with all my might at the creature's back knee. The lion head of my staff impacted with a muffled boom and the angry beast stumbled under the blow, swinging its head toward me and lashing out with its powerfully muscled trunk. I was forced to implement Time Shudder to avoid the blow, dancing backward and out of range of the injured beast. Fiona used the distraction to attack its other flank and it turned back toward her. I used the time to scan the edge of Cage of Vengeance and the dozen or so Gorelephants attempting to push their way in. We need to hurry this along, I shouted, seeing the cage start to fray. It had been the first time I had used the cage as we caught one of the creatures alone. But a bellow from it had drawn in nearby creatures to come to its aid. I suspected this was going to be a reoccurring issue and had decided to see if the cage could help out. And it did, but it was a lower level spell, not meant to hold off creatures with tier 2 strength. Similar to my area of denial ability, it was being ripped apart. I'm trying, but these things aren't exactly easy to kill, Fiona huffed as she phased out to avoid being stomped flat by the angry bleeding beast. One thing I hadn't taken into account was the limited amount of mana I would have available while the cage was in play. I had thought I could get by, but I used a lot of mana when I fought. I just didn't realize it anymore with my mana pool being so large. It changed the fight dynamic, causing me to shift from using abilities to fighting solely with my weapon. That didn't mean I was all out of tricks though, as my staff took on an icy chill as I rushed back in and slammed the dragon head of my weapon into the same injured leg. I had learned that overcharge worked wonders when I used it on my imbue, along with the bonus my weapon gave me to elemental damage. The Gorelephant's leg didn't just ice over, it froze solid. Before the creature could retaliate, I swung the staff around a second time, shattering the leg and rushing away as the creature bellowed in pain as it tipped on its side. It should have been an easy kill after that, but the beast kicked out with its remaining back leg, catching me in the chest and flinging me across the field. I groaned in pain as I slowly got back up. Fiona was slicing the creature's thin underbelly open while it tried to attack her, but with her ability to phase in and out, the attacks always missed. The attack had hurt like hell, but the armor was doing what it was designed to do, and even as I rose I felt my body becoming stronger. I looked at the damage I suffered and winced. That one kick had taken 300 health off of me. That was after being reduced by 60% by my armor and 10% by rock skin. Fiona finally finished the creature off as I limped back toward her. "We need to go, can you meet me at that rock outcropping we spotted an hour ago?" I wheezed. "Yet." Giving myself a few more seconds for my healing to do its work, I ran toward the far side of the cage. I sucked down a mana potion and got ready to speed away from the scene. I dropped the cage and ran as fast as my skills could take me. I could already hear the angry thundering of hoofs behind me, but it seemed like going all out. I was faster. Either the creatures chose not to chase us or they figured out it wasn't going to work, but either way, they finally turned around. I let out ragged gasping breaths as I finally jumped to the top of the rock. I lay flat against the hot surface as I caught my breath. Fiona appeared a minute or so later. She wasn't as quick as I was, but it wasn't like it mattered for her. She could just phase out to avoid any serious injury. "Well, that was fun," she said dryly, sitting down beside me in her human form. "Yeah, that could have gone better, but it was worth it. That one fight pushed me over halfway to level 16. I agree, the creatures, while a pain, are worth the effort. We need a better way of separating single targets though. I do have a few ideas for our next match, but let's rest here for a bit, shall we?" It took an hour for me to recover after using the Cage of Vengeance. Being limited to 250 mana made me feel like I was back in my early levels. I still recovered mana at a ridiculous rate, but it meant picking and choosing what to employ during a fight more carefully. It also made it impossible to multicast almost all of my spells due to the doubling requirement of the skill. It wasn't horrible, but definitely something I would need to keep in mind. Fiona and I spent the rest of the day fruitlessly searching for another lone Gorelephant. A group of 2 or even 3 would have been doable, but the smallest grouping we came across was 4, and most often they were in packs of 6 or more. With no luck, we headed back to the fortress which I had set down in the Panamanian jungle a few miles from this new landmass. "I don't know why they can't just cooperate with us and spread out," I grumbled as we walked. "Why not just blast them with the guns on the fortress?" While tempting, I wanted to get a feel for my new abilities. I already learned a few things that I otherwise might not have. Besides, it's good to stay in practice. I'm not disputing that fact, but wasn't the whole point of coming down here, to level? "Yes and no," I replied. I feel like my level shot up faster than my skills, and fighting in that tournament made it clear that I need every advantage that I can get. That being said, if I feel we've hit a dead end on improving, I may just blast the Gorelephants to bits just to feel better. We had just entered the dense jungle when I heard a strange sound. I motioned for Fiona to hide and scout while I slowly moved forward. It wasn't long before we came across the source of the disturbance. At first, I thought it was a deerkin as it had antlers and walked around on 2 legs. But as I got a better look, I saw that its movements were stilted. The smell of rot assaulted my nose shortly after, and I suppressed a gag as the creature walked through the forest. I looked around but only saw the lone creature. A twig snapped under my foot as I moved forward and the creature froze. Its head swiveled around like an owl, making a disturbing crack. Blank pitch black eyes stared at me before its entire body turned. Without so much as a sound, it ran toward me. Seeing no more need to hide, I got into a fighting stance as it quickly closed the distance. I fired off Identify. Higaround Swarm Beast Level 1. I was slightly taken off guard by the low-leveled creature, but I didn't relax my stance. The creature, which I could now tell was a grossly deformed deer, whipped its front leg at me faster than I thought a creature of its level could. I still easily blocked the strike, but I felt something wet slap against my armor. I didn't have time to inspect what it was as I fought off the creature's unrelenting strikes. Fiona was slashing at the creature as well, but it ignored her attacks completely. There was a searing pain in my arm and I jumped back to see what the hell it was. A leech-like creature had burrowed through the leather on my arm. I ripped it off along with a dozen others that were attempting to do the same. At least I now knew what the wet slap had been. I glanced at my status and saw a new icon. When I concentrated on it, I got an unwelcome surprise. Swarm Carrier Curse. If the curse isn't removed within an hour, the host body will die and become host to a new swarm. Curse cannot be cleansed or removed unless you kill the original vector of the curse. I was about to yell out to Fiona to quickly kill the beast, but before I could, the creature shook violently, disintegrating in a shower of tiny creatures. My eyes went wide as I saw them begin to burrow into the ground. With no time to coordinate with Fiona, I cast Imbue, adding fire and earth to my staff with overcharge. I smashed my staff down, activating Seismic Strike. A few of the disgusting creatures died, but I still had the curse. Thinking frantically, I activated Beacon. That seemed to work as the ground heaved and the leeches shot back out toward me. I wasn't done though. Knowing I had little time, I used Time Shutter to shave off a second of the activation time for Eye of the Storm. I hadn't needed to use the spell in some time, and with my higher level and the boost from overcharge in my weapon, it was like a volcano had erupted with me at its center. The molten rock was shot up into the air in a twisting vortex of fiery death. Even the wet jungle for hundreds of meters around caught fire or blackened due to the intense heat. I lifted off the ground, using my wings as I kicked off any remaining parts of the monster. The last slimy parasite flew off my leg and into the inferno, roasting to a crisp and ending the curse. I breathed a sigh of relief as I ended my spells and dropped to the smoldering ground outside of the effective range of the spell. Fiona appeared next to me a second later. What was that all about? A curse, one that couldn't be removed unless you killed every part of that creature. They were trying to burrow out of sight, so I didn't have any time to tell you what was going on. Fair enough, she replied, looking over the new clearing and the charred remains of trees, some of which were still burning. I didn't bother putting the fires out. The jungle was wet enough that it wouldn't spread. One good thing had come out of that weird fight: I had leveled my second class to 16. It seemed that each leech was worth very little experience, but the whole beast was made up of millions of the nasty little things, all shoved inside a skin suit. I said, tapping my fingers on my staff. What? Don't tell me you want to hunt these things. Why not? They give good experience, and as long as I torch them they aren't much of a threat. Yeah, but what if one escapes after infecting you? Fiona asked pointedly. Then I would die a horrible, horrible death. But I think the pros outweigh the cons in this case. Fine, but if you die, I'm going to haunt the shit out of your soul. Chapter 163, Pest Control. I stomped on the ground, producing a wave of molten rock in front of me. The charging swarm carrier, which had once been a massive boar, sunk into the superheated rock. It tried throwing leeches my way, but the superheated air cooked them before they made it to me. I made sure that none of the leeches escaped my attack. This had been the fourth swarm creature we had come across in the last few hours. Is it just me, or are we encountering them quicker than before? I asked. Seems that way. You think we are getting close to their point of origin? I don't know, these creatures could have spread for hundreds of miles for all we know. Best to kill any we find though. Besides, they are great for experience. I'm almost halfway to level 17 already. You must be getting close to 20, right? I have a ways to go yet. Remember the experience deficit I get? I hadn't forgotten, but I had hoped it wasn't as severe anymore. I guess my hope was misplaced. I simply nodded as we moved farther into the jungle. Fiona was a massive asset in our hunt for the creatures. She pointed me in the right direction and I dealt with the infected creature. This worked well, and I only got infected one more time. Fiona was about to force us to stop right then and there, but she stumbled upon something. You need to see this, come quickly. I followed Fiona as she wove her way through the dense underbrush. She kept her physical form and used her sword to slash a quick path through. What awaited on the other side of that jungle gave me pause. There was a large sinkhole, maybe 100 meters in diameter, but that wasn't what concerned me. It was the writhing mass of leeches that covered the entire floor and most of the wall of the sinkhole. Among that mass, I could see at least a dozen infected creatures at the bottom of the pit. Their bodies writhed as the leeches devoured their insides to produce more of themselves. The sight made me sick. I don't think I'll be able to kill them all with one attack. There is no way I'm letting you go down there, Fiona argued. We can't just leave them to propagate, I countered. Who said anything about leaving them? Let's bring the fortress over and just blast the hole to bits. Fine, but I'm still going to do a thorough cleaning with my abilities after. It wouldn't do much good if we let one escape. Fine, she eventually replied. So that's what we did. We returned to the fortress and flew it back to the sinkhole. I didn't use the monocannons though, they weren't designed to aim straight down. Instead, I utilized the defensive perimeter built into the fortress to turn the entire pit into an enormous bug zapper. It might have been overkill, considering the lightning defense had been designed to kill things with much more health, but I must admit it was effective. What greeted us afterward was a pit filled with ash. I still used my skills to tear up the floor of the sinkhole and surrounding walls to make sure none of the creatures had hidden or burrowed within. Our efforts had been worth it, as Fiona finally ticked over to level 20 despite her deficit. With that came another big change. I only learned about this change when Fiona nearly tackled me to the ground with a bone-crushing hug. Oof! What's all this about? She released me and smiled. Check out my class. I used Identify on her and was surprised at what I saw. Fiona Clark, Spiritual Sword Dancer 20. You got your class back? I asked in astonishment. Her grin nearly split her face as she nodded at me. I also got all of my old skills back and kept my new ones. That's fantastic. Any other changes? She read off the message she got from the system. Your dedication to protecting your companion has been deemed exemplary. You will no longer be bound or restricted. May your new life be full of joy and companionship. It meant that Fiona was well. Fiona again. She wasn't bound to me and she would no longer suffer under her experience penalty. She could also maintain her solid human form indefinitely. With her spiritual powers though, she would be a devastating opponent to fight. We also did a test of some light healing and no matter what form she took she no longer suffered damage from being healed. I guessed spiritual and spectral were two separate things. It was good to know in case I ran across other spiritual creatures. After some more congratulations, we finished making sure the sinkhole was clear of those creatures. So, what class are you taking for your second? I asked after we were safely inside the fortress. I'm honestly not sure. I never expected this day to come or be given back my abilities from my previous life. It's all a bit overwhelming if I'm honest. I can certainly understand that. Would it be overreaching if I offered my opinion? She shook her head. Well, you have two options. Go all in as the world's most badass woman with a blade by picking a class that complements your first one. Or you could choose a complementary class that works with your abilities but doesn't limit you to only being a swordswoman. I don't know what classes these could be but take your time to decide. I think we can rest nearby for a few days. Thank you for everything. I will think on your words and look over classes before I decide. I tilted my head slightly in reply and gave her a smile. I was overjoyed that she was no longer forcefully bound to me. There was a small part of me that was sad that she was no longer my companion but I kicked that piece of my mind into submission. She was still my friend and ally. As Fiona walked off to her room to think, I decided to go over my gains. I had hit level 17 in Maw of the Void after using the fortress to kill off the colony of leeches. As with most levels, I didn't gain anything except 2 more free ability slots. Fighting the leeches and the Gorlephants didn't earn me any skills either because they weren't sapient creatures. That was fine, I had been neglecting my skill cleanup anyway due to how busy I had been. I took the time to look over my skills and see what needed to go. As I had a few days of rest, this would be the perfect time to get rid of some. Boiling oil was the first on the list to go along with one of the useless skills I got from killing off Javier's people. I checked to see what void lottery netted me. Festering Wound, causes the next open wound you inflict to start to fester. Deals 2 damage per second until removed. This is considered unholy damage and can be cleansed. Cost 25 mana, cooldown 15 SEC. At first, the spell didn't sound all that great. But it didn't have a time limit and I suspected the effects would stack with each open wound I inflicted while the skill was active. While my main weapons didn't usually open wounds, that was fine. Since the spell only said next open wound and not next weapon strike, I may be able to add it to some of my magical attacks. I would have to test some possibilities. There were a few other skills I still wasn't sure I wanted to hang on to. Hex Circle, I still hadn't used or even thought about. And honestly, Area of Denial was becoming nearly useless. What had once been my main defensive skill was now relegated to absorbing 1 attack. Even my enhanced shield skill was almost more useful at this point. It's too bad it only absorbed a portion of damage instead of all damage. Banshee's Wail and Protection saw very little use anymore. Shroud was another skill that had become nearly useless as my enemies became stronger and had abilities to see through the magical fog. Before today, I might have also tossed Beacon into the mix but if it wasn't for that skill I would have died to the first swarm beast. And while I hadn't used Silence yet, I had an idea for that. After some more thought, I got rid of Hex Circle as it didn't really fit my fighting style and Shroud. I may have kept Hex Circle if it worked with anything besides magical chalk, besides it required a smooth flat surface just to draw it on, making it useless in most situations. Point Defense, a burst of magical energy will automatically intercept oncoming projectiles, destroying them. Lasts for 30 SEC, cost 15 mana per projectile, cooldown 3 minutes. The skill was a bit odd, not something I had ever seen before. But it would be handy. I would have to watch it closely though as it could eat through my mana quickly. I wondered what it considered projectiles. I would have to test its limits. If it considered those leeches that were flung at me a projectile, that might come in very handy. With the skills out of the way that left me with 11 open skill slots. I would have to find some creatures that I could get some skills from to fill those empty slots. In the meantime, it was time to rest and recuperate. The next few days went by pretty swiftly. Fiona was still going over her choices for a second class while I practiced with my new abilities to help integrate them with my combat. This was something new for me, but having used Cage of Vengeance for the first time and finding myself so restricted on ways to hurt my opponent, I figured I needed to test abilities before I got into combat. Rampaging and throwing out random abilities during a fight would only get me so far. It may work on bestial opponents, but fighting people was another matter entirely. I only had to reflect back on my fights with truly strong people to see that. My fight with Randy Cotton was a good example. I had only survived due to dumb luck, something I expected was only made possible thanks to his meddling with fate. My combat skills were only average at best. I could still leverage that along with my unique abilities to overcome stronger opponents though. With that in mind, I spent almost an entire day sparring with Fiona. My first test was to check the limits of point defense. She hurled fist-sized rocks at me as quickly as she could. The spell would gather mana from my body and intercept the rocks, either deflecting them or blowing them apart. It was quite effective against rocks. We did have a bow, but Fiona was only passable at firing the weapon. The spell worked as advertised and impacted the incoming arrow, causing it to explode. Fiona didn't have any ranged magic to test my new spell, but she did have her reflect ability again. Unfortunately, it didn't work with the prismatic rapier and its ability to cancel magic. She was able to switch back to her old sword though. I learned that most spells that were fired were considered a projectile by my defensive magic, as long as they were reflected directly at me. I learned that if Fiona targeted the ground near me, my spell failed to intercept the attack. It was an important thing to know and could have caused me to get seriously hurt during a battle had I not been aware of the limitation. Fiona had also finally chosen her second class. And I understood why. Fiona Clark, Spiritual Sword Dancer / Duelist 20/1. The choice she made was a sound one. She had been easily taken out by a wielder of that same class. Yet that wasn't the only reason she decided on that class. It gave her the ability to dual wield her rapier and longsword. An arguably deadly combination, only made more so by her ability to now either deflect magic or nullify it. Her first level also gave her a skill called Soul Opponent, which prevented anyone from interfering in a fight she was having. I had no idea what magic fuckery made that work. I honestly thought the combination was more terrifying than Randy Cotton's, and he bent fate and controlled time to some degree. A quick duel showed that it was a formidable combination, as I was hard-pressed to beat her even with my 17 levels on her. Chapter 164, Out of Sight. Edward Rosewill had been given little time to prepare for the arrival of this Lord Victi. He could only hope his preparations were enough. He found it irksome that he had to bow down to an alien invader, but he knew that might come to pass when he agreed to have the Enchanters Guild join his town in exchange for defenses. But he hadn't expected a visit so soon. He had barely solidified his hold on the town and ejected the malcontents before they showed up. Speaking of malcontents, he hadn't heard many rumblings about them lately. He would need to speak with his captain of the guard to find out what was going on with those people. If they were still causing problems, he might be forced to send out patrols to pacify the non-residents. He checked his tie once more in the mirror before there was a knock on the large door to his penthouse office. His assistant stuck her head in. "Mr. Rosewill, Lord Victi and his entourage have arrived. Send them in, and have some foods catered in." His assistant nodded before disappearing out of the door. A moment later the door opened and a tall man in expensive robes and an overbearing aura walked in. Edward had been coached on how to act in front of the man. He bowed his head in greeting, suppressing his feelings of loathing at having to capitulate to someone. Edward stayed bowed while the man looked over the room, his gaze finally landing on him. Edward swore he heard a derisive snort. "You may rise, I find your accommodations adequate." Edward suppressed his anger and rose to lock eyes with the Lord. "Lord Victi, I am." "Yes, humbled. I am aware." Edward was taken off guard by the interruption and the man seeming to read his thoughts, but he hid it well. "What? What you can do for me, Mr. Rosewill, is answer some questions. I don't plan on sticking around long in this backwater." "I will do my best to answer your questions, Lord Victi," Edward replied, this time not being cut off. There was definitely a derisive snort from the Lord this time around. "What can you tell me about enchanted items being made in this area?" Lord Victi replied with a predatory smile. Once Edward had realized what Lord Victi was trying to learn about, he was more than happy to disclose everything he knew about the man named Paul Fuller. Unfortunately, it wasn't all that much, as the man had fled Houston after the Dwarven attack. Deciding he needed more up-to-date information, he went in search of his guard captain. After he had orchestrated the deaths of most of the ossified idiots in the gated community, Edward took command of any of the guards who were now out of work. They had been instrumental in his takeover of Houston and now accounted for 70% of the guard forces he controlled. The rest came from sycophants that wished to latch on to his rise to power. He was fine with that. Those types of people were easy to control and placate. Edward entered the office without knocking, as was his right. His captain was a bit indecent at the time with some young woman, but he just stood there and glowered as the two dressed and the woman ran past him looking highly embarrassed. "Is this what I'm paying you for?" Edward growled. "Sorry sir," the captain replied, looking awkward and disheveled. Edward didn't even know the man's name, not that it mattered. What mattered was the man listened and did his job. He didn't even care if the man was using his position to get in the women's pants, what mattered was results. But he couldn't come off as accepting of stuff like this, or his people would use that as an excuse to get away with even more. "Keep your dick in your pants on my time." "Yes sir, sorry, sir. It won't happen again," the man quickly replied. With that business out of the way, Edward got right to the point of his visit. "I need you to gather information about that Paul Fuller and his people. Where they went and what they are up to. Do you think you can handle that?" Edward asked pointedly. "Certainly, Mr. Rose will." "Good, also what's going on with the outcasts? I haven't heard them mentioned in my weekly briefings." "Oh, they have been mostly quiet. I have a report here somewhere," the man replied, digging through the mess of papers that had fallen from his desk during his lascivious activities. Eventually, he found what he was looking for. "Here we are," he said before glancing at Edward. "Ahem, yes. The report states that some of the people boarded one of those barges. Most have either moved to the outskirts of Old Houston or left for other nearby settlements. There are a few that still demand to be let back in, but the guards have been able to take care of them without much issue." Edward recalled the barges and something Ben Hewitt had said. Piecing that together with the information Lord Vic T had been inquiring about, he was sure the barges were another invention of that Paul. "Find out where those barges are going, and try and get one of our people on board. I think that will be the quickest way to find out what that outlaw Paul Fuller is up to." "Right away, Mr. Rose will." Edward left the office, angry with himself for missing that connection. It was so obvious now that he thought about it. But his focus had been on that overgrown fleabag. He had only known that Gaben had had a conflict with one of that overgrown fleabag's friends, not what sort of conflict it had been. At the time it wasn't important, as he only needed that idiot's money. It would take some time, but his people were good at gathering information. Mr. Nobody stood in front of another mirror room. Dark figures were displayed on the panels, all silently judging him and his failure. "What of the node?" one of the members asked. "Currently unretrievable," Mr. Nobody replied in his normal monotone voice. "Why?" another asked. "We are unsure. Attempts to open a portal inside have been met with failure. We have a few people traveling to the location. They have the skills to traverse the ventilation system, but that will take time since we deemed it a security risk to open portals near the surface of the site." "What about our eyes on Mr. Fuller?" a third member asked. "Dead or captured would be my guess. We have long-range scouts watching the city, but the information they can gather is limited. We know a wall has gone up, and some towers. Our best guess is those are shield towers. Monocannons have also been spotted along the walls," Mr. Nobody responded. The final member asked her question. "What of the project?" "Most of the rune work was moved after Stone's removal from the order. We lost a few items and early works, but nothing that will affect us in the long term." There was some back and forth conversation amongst the others as Mr. Nobody stood there. It took a few minutes before everything settled down and the first speaker spoke again. "This new development is troubling. Do we know how Mr. Fuller managed to find the node and Stone Cell outpost?" "Nothing definitive," Mr. Nobody responded. "A theory then?" "Enlighten us," the first speaker added. "As you know, I was an eyewitness to the events. I had just entered the portal room when Mr. Fuller appeared. He appeared directly on the location that we used for incoming transits. So you believe he found a way to piggyback on our teleports? Either that or trace them back. But given the timing, I put more stock on him piggybacking. In either case, that is highly disturbing. I vote we issue a no-transit order within 50 miles of St. June. All in favor say aye." The vote was unanimous. Hardly a surprise to Mr. Nobody, considering the implications. "Send someone out to notify the Watchers. If the opportunity arises, slip some more spies into the city. We need to know what this man is up to." "What of the guild?" the third speaker asked. Mr. Nobody answered that question as well. "They are getting closer to the truth. War seems inevitable at this point. That is probably the reason for Mr. Fuller's help with building up the city's defenses." "Has the seer been able to determine anything?" No, the lines of the future in that region have gone dark, the second speaker responded. What of the rest of the world? Mr. Nobody asked, with concern. The areas we are working in are still on track, with only a few issues. Other areas have also gone dark, but those individuals seem content to stay where they are, the final speaker stated. Mr. Nobody nodded in reply and the screens faded away. With Stone gone, Mr. Nobody was the only active cell now in the United States. It sometimes made things difficult to keep track of everything, but he had no choice. Eventually, a new cell leader would be voted in, but that could be months. It was a bit irksome that all the other cell leaders seemed to be having a much easier time of it. While there were more continents, it was rare for the order to have to impose themselves on some. North America was a hotbed, as was Europe, Asia, and Africa. There were cells in every continent, even Antarctica, but few had more than 2 or 3 cells. It was mostly for redundancy in case something like what Stone did occurred or a cell was compromised. Rebuilding a cell was usually pretty easy, but with a large portion of the world population dead, it was a much more difficult prospect. Angering people like Paul Fuller didn't help matters. Knowing he had a lot of work to accomplish, Mr. Nobody left the node chamber and got back to work. Well, Mayor, what is your first agenda? Kurt asked, looking a bit annoyed. Martin pinched the bridge of his nose in irritation. The election had completed last week, but it took time to get up to speed, despite him having worked with Kurt and Paul for months. There were certain things Kurt had refused to disclose. And now the man was dumping everything he didn't wish to deal with in his lap. Martin let out the breath he had been holding. Kurt, just call me Martin, I'm not big on protocol. Kurt soured at this and Martin wanted to sigh. Kurt could be a real stickler for rules. Sometimes this was good, especially for a sheriff, but sometimes it made the man highly inflexible. Martin ignored Kurt's pouting and picked up the report he had been handed last week. He wondered how Kurt had managed to keep the issue under wraps for so long. The report was short and concise but painted a dire picture of the city's food reserves. The problem had mostly gone away when the merchants had started coming through, but that only helped so far. With the growing population, the issue had only grown and become worse. Martin had pondered over the issue for a few days. Let's go for a ride. Martin drove the Paul-modified vehicle with Kurt in the passenger seat, to the east side of the city and through the gate. The gate was kept open during the day for people to come and go as they pleased. With guards stationed there, it wasn't much of a concern. It was a few hundred feet to the edge of the plateau from the gate and a winding path that led down to the land beyond. Kurt looked a bit unsure but kept silent as they drove on. Martin could have just driven the truck off the plateau, but this wasn't the time for theatrics. Martin wasn't a farmer, but being a small-town country boy he had picked up a few things doing odd jobs for neighbors when he was growing up. He stopped the truck and got out as the area started becoming thick with trees. Why are we way out here? Kurt inquired. I want to see how good the soil is. Farming? Won't that be too dangerous outside the walls? Martin ignored the question as he kneeled down in an open area and dug through the dirt. As he had thought, it was dark and rich soil, perfect for farming. He wiped his hands off and stood back up. I will contract with Paul's people to have this area cleared and a wall erected to keep the farmers safe. We can't afford to only rely on our fishing to bring in enough food to survive. And importing food isn't an option at the moment. 1, because we have no easy access to bazaars, and 2, because the city coffers are rather meager at the moment. That's mostly your friends doing, Kurt grumbled, more than happy to pass off the issue to someone else. You need to stop that shit right now, Martin responded angrily, getting a jerk of surprise from Kurt. If it wasn't for Paul, the city would still be facing daily monster attacks and still be suffering from food shortages. But now there is a wall that keeps wandering monsters out, a steady influx of people and resources, and stability for the people. So I will not listen to you badmouth the man when he isn't here to defend himself. If this is too much for you to handle, perhaps I need to replace you with a new sheriff. When Kurt didn't respond, Martin only nodded. Get in, we have other work to do. Ska patrolled the city, making sure nobody was causing too much trouble. Most people just received a fine or time in a cell. It was a strange dynamic that humans had, but Ska had grown used to the irregularities. Ska found guard duty to be much more stressful than hunting. At least with hunting, you knew your quarry. As a guard, he had to be vigilant of everyone around him. Most people were polite or at least civil when he strode past. He was one of the few guards that patrolled solo thanks to his level and skills. But anyone not new to the city already knew who he was and that it wasn't a good idea to piss him off. He let out a small contented growl at that thought, making a few people, close enough to hear, scurry away in fear that they were his target. He now understood how the alphas of his village felt when they could just look at someone and without saying anything, make them slink away. Scar rounded the corner of the bustling market district. His keen vision quickly picked out a group of men causing trouble at the far end of the road. They were harassing a vendor by shoving him around and messing up his stall. Scar flexed his paws angrily, causing his blade-like claws to extend and retract. Before he rushed to see what the problem was, he unclipped the radio from his armor strap and contacted dispatch. "Dispatch, this is Scar. I have a disturbance in the market district involving 7 individuals." It took a moment before a reply came in. "Roger that, we are sending another team to your area." Scar purred in approval when they didn't ask him to wait like they did when he first joined. Not that he would have anyway. Scar quickly jogged toward the growing altercation with a gleam in his eye. One of the men spotted his approach and tapped on the guy manhandling the merchant. The man looked over with a snarl and threw the merchant to the ground. Scar noted that the merchant was human. Usually, people got angrier with the non-human residents. By the time Scar had arrived, the other 5 men had formed a rough half-circle with the leader at the center. They didn't have any weapons drawn, but almost everyone went around armed these days. Scar could see a few different weapons on the men. The most concerning thing was the leader and his lack of weapons. That usually meant a caster of some sort. Scar glanced around and noticed most people had quickly moved away from the area. He nodded in approval before turning back toward the men. "What can we do for you, officer?" the leader said, spitting a glob of something on the ground. Scar ignored the man while he glanced at the store owner. "Are you okay?" The man nodded. "Good, please come over here." The man hesitated, looking at the other group. "Hey! Don't ignore me, asshole. You fucking outworlders are all the same. Coming over here and stealing our land and forcing your goddamn rules upon us. This is America. And you don't belong here." Scar continued ignoring the man as he ranted, keeping an eye on the shopkeeper as he hobbled over. The man didn't appear all that injured, so he would heal shortly. That just left Scar to deal with these 7 troublemakers. It didn't really matter what they did. If they went quietly they would be punished, but if they resisted it wouldn't go well for them. Scar hoped they resisted. Scar had grown up with the system and troublemakers always had to be dealt with severely because if they weren't, they could cause a significant amount of damage or endanger the community in the future. At least this town had figured that out. The standard way of dealing with these situations was incapacitate and contain, or kill if they resisted. Everything else could be figured out later. Scar didn't think too much about it. He earned experience in his 2nd class by safeguarding innocent people. He could still earn experience through killing, but the system seemed to be able to distinguish what act he was stopping and the experience could be reduced. When the merchant was safely behind Scar and away from the area of battle, and before the man finished his rambling, Scar burst into motion. It seemed the men had been expecting it as they drew weapons and readied spells, but they hadn't expected Scar's explosive speed. They chose resistance and Scar snarled in approval. The leader screamed as his spell went off, a crackling burst of energy flying harmlessly into the sky as Scar tore both his arms from his body, before kicking off the man to send him tumbling backward and redirecting his motion toward his next target. The fight was over in less than a minute, with all of the men missing at least one limb. Scar walked around, dripping a bit of healing potion into the open wounds. It was enough to have them seal over to prevent the people from bleeding out, but not enough to regrow the limbs. That would take a few days. Not that it would matter much. These people had attacked him. There was only one penalty for that. Scar wished he could just deal with the men now, but there were laws and he had to follow them. Even if he found them asinine. It was rare he actually got to fight in the city. Most people were smart enough to give up when they saw him coming. Scar had taken a few hits, nothing major though. Most of the damage had been healed thanks to his magical claws. The rest was a badge of honor he wore proudly. He hoped Paul would return soon. He needed to get the runes redone as they were starting to lose their effectiveness. Scar stood there among the groaning and screaming men as he waited for his backup to arrive. He wondered if Martin would be available tonight to make some delicious food. Chapter 165, Dwindling Returns. Fiona and I scoured the forest for miles around the sinkhole but only found 3 more of the leech creatures. That was both good and bad. Good that they hadn't spread further, but bad for leveling. I hadn't gained a single level from the 3 creatures, but Fiona had gained 5 levels from her participation, making her duelist class now level 6. Which was admitted low, considering she had no real AoE abilities. Her shackle skill came in the handiest as it prevented everything within a small radius from moving. That included every single leech the creature was made up of. Then all I had to do was burn the body to a crisp and move on. After spending the better part of a day searching in vain for more of the disgusting swarm beasts, we moved on and headed back toward the fortress. Fiona had a large number of new abilities she wanted to test out and I was more than happy to assist. After resting for a bit we both stood in a small clearing a short walk from the fortress. Our duel had already begun but we circled each other looking for an opening. Fiona was cognizant enough to steer clear of using her spectral form while I was using Consuming Void as my weapon. She didn't want to feel the sting of spiritual damage, even if it would be healed after the fight ended. I wasn't about to put it away in exchange for my other weapon though. I had to take away at least one of her trump cards. Eventually, I made my move, blurring in with Blink Step, enhanced with Overcharge. She deflected my staff and I barely managed to dodge a quick thrust to my jugular as I danced away. I did feel a slight trickle of blood running down my neck. I guess I hadn't been as successful at dodging as I thought. Still, the blow would have bounced off my armor if I had been wearing it. For this duel, I decided to go armorless seeing as Fiona still sported her pre-life armor that wasn't even enchanted. I tried getting in close a few more times but came away bleeding each and every encounter. This was a no-holds-barred match but I wanted to see how my skills with the staff had improved. Her armor sported a nasty dent when she had been a tad too slow to dodge one of my strikes. I could see her breathing heavily as I twirled my staff and kept her out of range for her deadly blades. She had held back on using the prismatic rapier's ability to release an energy wave. I wasn't quite sure why but I would take it. I watched her ready her blades a moment before they crossed over each other. There was a blinding flash followed by a searing pain in my shoulder. I jumped back, feeling the wind of a follow-up strike barely miss my chest. I quickly blinked away the blindness just in time to see another crescent of energy fly my way. I activated point defense and it blasted the energy wave with one of my own. Fiona was hot on the heels of the attack though, racing through the obscuring dust cloud to try and close the distance. I stomped my foot on the ground, releasing Seismic Strike. Off balance, Fiona stumbled to the side. I used the opportunity to fire off an overcharged arcane bolt that hit her in the side. I heard her hiss in pain as I activated my wings and soared into the air and out of her reach. I tried peppering the area around her with spells, but she was intercepting them with her blades instead of letting them land. I had to dodge a few of the spells she threw back my way and took the opportunity to heal. The rest of the fight turned into a stalemate as I kept out of her reach but couldn't do significant damage to her with my spells. Eventually, the fight came down to stats. I simply had too many and a much larger pool of mana to draw abilities from. By the time it was over, I was victorious but exhausted and sweating profusely. Fiona simply collapsed on the ground and groaned. That was not a very chivalrous fight, she lamented from her prone position. Screw chivalry, it's all about the win. I gotta say though, had you been able to flit about in your ghost form, I think this fight would have been over far quicker and with you as the winner. Probably, but I gotta get used to not needing it. Besides, this was about learning my new abilities, not relying on old ones. If I wanted to do that I would have shackled you and just gone in for the kill. I grunted in acknowledgement. Despite her self-imposed handicap, the fight had gone on far longer than any fight I had had to date. It's not like I held much back. She was just a nightmare to deal with in close combat. And with her ability to nullify or absorb and reflect spells, it made her impossible to fight outside of melee range for most spellcasters. Add in her ability to turn into a spectre which allowed her flight and increased speed and you had a very challenging opponent. I doubt even Ska could beat her now. Then again he would certainly give a good showing of it. I was curious how she would fare against some of the tournament champions. She couldn't be frozen in place by Tatiana and I doubt Hagar's blood absorption abilities could cause her any trouble if she stayed incorporeal through the fight. Mr. Blaine's abilities while visually impressive would not affect her thanks to her immunity to mind-affecting spells. That only left some of the previous fighters that both Ska and I easily dealt with. No, I think if she competed to her fullest, there is no doubt who would come out on top. We decided to rest the remainder of the day before heading back into the plains to fight Gorlophants again. The return to the plains was uneventful and we actually managed to separate 2 Gorlophants, off doing what amounted to Gorlophant love. That's as far as I want to go on that topic, and wished it was all I had been privy to myself. I refrained from using the cage at first, testing out my new strategy. I rushed in and cast silence. The spell had to have the weirdest word of power of all spells in my mantra enchanter class. It was like a warbling noise, but instead of sound, it was the absence of it. My momentary surprise almost got me flattened as the angry male charged me. His angry bellow was contained by the spell, however, and none of the closer herd members came to assist in his plight. While I dodged the angry male, Fiona was carving up the legs on the female to keep her within the zone of my spell. I danced around the large beast's swinging trunk as it tried to bat me away and hit it with an energy lance from only a few feet away. Despite silence, I wasn't as limited as I had been when I was using the cage. Most of the spells I acquired in my second class didn't require a verbal component, making them ideal in this situation. The beast stumbled as my spell blew off one of its rear legs. That had come as a surprise to me considering how annoying tough these creatures were. Something about my silence spell must have prevented the creature from activating its protection. The only thing I could figure it being was the bellow they gave out before charging. I smiled. This fight was going to be easier than I had thought. I, of course, was proven wrong less than a minute later when the effects of silence wore off. The creatures were nearly down, but the female managed to get off a cry to her pack mates. We had just enough time to finish them off and hightail it out of there before a group of 10 nearly cut off our retreat. But it had been worth it. The two, level 26 creatures had netted me another level, upping Maw of the Void to 18. Fiona had really made out like a bandit in the exchange, gaining 6 levels in her duelist class. That put her at level 12 in her second class after only 2 days. If I had any hope of beating her in a heads-up fight, that was now gone. I got to see her new skills in play during our next Gorliphant assault, and it was impressive. I especially liked how she seemed to cause all the other Gorliphants to ignore her as they focused on me. It was only a group of 3 in total, but still. I hadn't been able to get silence off before they bellowed and rushed us, but this pack was quite a ways from any others. They also weren't nearly as high of a level, being only 22, but that was fine. I dashed out of the way of a magically enhanced charge, tearing a thin line down the creature's tough hide with my staff. I managed to activate Festering Wound but didn't have time to activate Corrupting Touch or Calcifying Strike before I got clipped in the shoulder by a large rock, picked up, and thrown by the other attacker. I was thrown to the ground and had to quickly dodge Trampling Feet as the one I attacked was panicking as the wound grew worse. I wasn't completely successful in my dodging as one of the hoofed paws smashed down on my hand with a crunch. I choked back a scream as I finished rolling away, putting the wounded Gorliphant between me and his buddy before I started healing my injured hand. That didn't seem to faze the other one though, as it plowed into its companion, almost pushing it over on top of me if it wasn't for a quick cast of Wings of the Falcon to take me out of harm's way. I whipped my staff down in an arc, sending an overcharged shockwave at the charging brute. The creature stumbled to a stop and shook its head, trying to clear the effect of the spell. I didn't wait to let it as I switched out my weapon for Dominion and Destruction and came crashing down with the full force of the Lion's Head enchantment on the beast's skull. There was a hollow thud as the creature's entire body rippled from the impact and it crashed to the ground. I hit both beasts with Frostwave and Corrupting Touch, followed by Calcifying Strike. This guaranteed they would die even if we had to flee. I looked to see how Fiona was faring. She looked bloodied and I saw that the creature she was fighting had blood dripping down one of its horns. But that beast looked nearly spent as it bled from hundreds of shallow cuts. I quickly healed Fiona, glad that she could now accept healing from me again, and got back to finishing off my targets. We kept at it for another few days, but the Gorliphants were just too annoying to fight. They were smart enough to group up and almost always came to the assistance of others in trouble. In that time Fiona had only gained 2 more levels as we were forced to restrict our attacks to lower level groups. As we were doing another sweep I saw Fiona pause. I stopped as well, waiting to see if she had located an acceptable target. She motioned me over and I quickly jogged the 600 feet separating us. It wasn't until I got within a few feet that I felt it. Is that what I think it is? I asked. I believe so, want to go check it out? As if I would give up a chance to clear out another horde dungeon, I replied with a big grin. Chapter 166, A New Horde. It took some searching to pin down the location of the dungeon, but we eventually found it. At first, we had mistaken the rocks peeking from the grass as nothing but scattered boulders. There had certainly been enough of those throughout the grassland. But as we got closer, you could see the cut surfaces and even cornerstones marking where the buildings had once stood. All that remained now was a few scattered and weather-worn rocks to mark what had once been a massive structure. We had overlooked it for the simple fact that every horde dungeon we had come across had been some insect burrow. But the entrance to this one proved to be a trap door set in the crumbling remains of a basement. Another oddity was the fact that no creatures were spilling from the entrance as almost all other dungeons seemed prone to. The only one that didn't feature this was the undead dungeon Fiona and I braved so long ago. You think this is another undead dungeon? I asked, coming to a stop near the closed doorway. That seems likely given its location. Still want to give it a go? Might as well, but keep an eye out for traps. Also, here, take this, I said, pulling out a mace from my ring and handing it to her. Thanks, but don't expect to sleep with me after we're done with this dungeon, she replied with a straight face. I choked in surprise and spluttered. Ytha, that wasn't what I was thinking at all. She just laughed. You were way too tense, now let's go kill some undead. I glared at her reproachfully, but she was right, something about undead dungeons just got to me. Just open it, will you? She heaved the heavy iron ring and the door protested but eventually opened. And the world went white for a split second as a blast threw me into the air. I landed with a grunt as all the air was pushed out of my lungs upon impact. If it wasn't for my armor absorbing most of the impact, I was pretty sure that blast might have killed me. I would worry about my health later though, as I levered myself off the ground slowly and painfully, every bone in my body feeling like I had just run a marathon. I looked over to see if Fiona was okay. She was alive but fighting off 3 armored skeletons, with more rising around the ruins every second. I felt my body heating up as it slowly absorbed the energy from the armor, strengthening it. I quickly cast Rejuvenate on Fiona and Healing Touch on myself as I got to my feet. Dominion and Destruction was already a blur in my hand as I batted away rusty blades that sought to slice me apart or stab through my squishy bits. I had barely enough time to use Identify on the creatures. Corpse Knight level 28. I had expected the dungeon to be a higher level, but this was nuts. I batted away another stab that skittered across my chest armor before imbuing my staff with water and ice. Elemental damage wouldn't harm the undead much, but it would enhance my next spell. Regenerating Rain poured down on one of the skeletons and it burst into pinpricks of bright flame where the water touched it. 2 closer skeletons were also hit by the increased radius of the spell, giving me time to reposition and blast another with an energy lance. I also tried stealing a skill to see if the undead counted as sapient, they did not. The shockwave of my energy lance attack blew another skeleton apart and sent 2 more tumbling to the ground, not much more than shattered bones. I did a quick check on Fiona and saw she was holding her own against 7 or 8 more skeletons. I was now extremely glad she had decided to take the duelist class. Fiona. Go Spectral, I have a plan. Well, hurry it up, I can't keep this up much longer, she yelled in response. I blasted another knight with my monocannon and started casting Eye of the Storm. I was forced to dodge a few blades and take a stab to my torso, but I got the spell off. The remaining water from Regenerating Rain was sucked into my spell, giving the driving maelstrom of wind, water, and ice a touch of holy damage as well. That didn't stop the undead from trying to push through my spell, and I had to kick a few into the storm, taking a nasty slash across my leg for my effort. I kept it up though as Fiona joined me in the center, returning to her physical form to fight off anything that broke through. She had the mace I had given her in one hand and the prismatic rapier in her other. The sword wasn't much good against the undead, but the energy attack it delivered was effective at pushing them back, if not outright carving through their bodies. I continued the spell for a full 30 seconds, blowing through a large portion of my mana, but the effects were worth it. Most of the undead were reduced to burning cinders from the holy damage. The 5 that weren't were not well off, and Fiona and I were able to deal with them. Once the last undead fell, I healed us both and sat exhausted on a short stone wall. Still want to explore this dungeon? I asked tiredly. We did go in, probably not the wisest move, but it was hard to pass up the chance for more stat points. The open trapdoor led into a blackened stairway that led down. I'm not sure who's the tankiest one here, but I think I'll go first, I said, looking into the darkness. Probably for the best. I only survived that blast through sheer luck and being able to phase out before it hit me as I was behind the opening door. Remind me to make you some new armor, I added before crossing the threshold of the dungeon. You have entered Carthan's Forgotten Legion, level 30 Horde Dungeon. Recommended team size of 6 people, level 25 and at least 1 class or higher. I winced at the level. While the main mobs might be a bit lower, probably around 28 going by what we fought above, the boss would likely be over level 30. There was no way we were making it through all of the waves. If we managed through 100, I would be surprised. The bottom of the stairs led out into the crumbling remains of a training area. Broken weapon racks lined the walls and the once tan sand was stained a dark red of dried blood. The combatants having shed that blood now rising from the arena floor to take up new arms against the interlopers. Over a dozen skeletons, most wearing rusted and bloody armor and carrying similar weapons, ran at the two of us. The rattle of bones against steel set my nerves on edge and made me really want to just leave. But I endured and cast a wall of brimstone in the path of 3 charging skeletons. Not even their rusty equipment survived passing through the wall. The problem came when one of the unarmored skeletons passed through. Instead of being burned to a crisp like his fellows, he emerged out the closer side engulfed in flames and heading straight for us. My eyes went wide and I quickly backed away and cast Regenerating Rain, to both smother the fire and deal holy damage to the skeleton. But not before the skeleton gathered the flames into a ball in its hands and projected them toward us like a flamethrower. "Look out!" I shouted, diving to the side to avoid the hellfire that shot our way. I felt the passing heat burn my skin through my armor as it splashed against the wall behind us. Left in its wake was glowing melted rock. I rolled to my feet and snapped my staff out at the unarmored skeleton with a resounding boom, throwing it back across the room through the force of the lion's head enchantment. I did manage to get an identify off on the second skeleton. Damned skeletal cleric level 29. I groaned as I read that and watched the undead cleric rise from the far wall. Sickly green light covered its body and the other injured skeletons, healing them to full. The only ones not healed were the ones turned to ash by my fire. I already knew this dungeon was going to suck. It took Fiona and my combined effort to kill off the 2 clerics quickly enough for their healing to be overwhelmed. If Fiona hadn't been able to get the other skeletons trapped by her shackles, it wouldn't have been possible as they constantly harassed us. With the 2 clerics out of the way, another quick brimstone wall took care of the remaining knights. I looked around the room in confusion. Does something feel off about this dungeon to you, or is it just me? Now that you mention it, yet, where is the next wave of undead? We found out after clearing the next room, which turned out to be some sort of barracks. Thankfully it was only filled with skeleton knights. As we were finishing up, the unmistakable sound of bones clattering against metal resounded from the previous room we had just cleared. Into the barracks room poured the same 12 skeletons we had killed originally. If that wasn't bad enough, as we fought those, the ones in the current room, we had just killed, were starting to glow and reassemble themselves. We made a quick decision after clearing the path. This place was too dangerous to be caught between 2 groups of enemies. Dying for the sake of maybe 1 stat point each wasn't worth it. So we fought our way back to the entrance and back up the stairs. All the while the undead kept reconstituting, even from my brimstone. I used shockwave with the lion's head to send the knight I was fighting tumbling down the stairs. Now clear, I rushed out of the basement and Fiona slammed the entrance closed. With some metamagic, I pulled the rock walls of the basement down on top of the dungeon entrance. Well, that fucking sucked. Let's not do that again, I stated tiredly. Sorry about that, I thought it was finally my chance to gain some stat points since I missed out on the last ones, Fiona replied. Don't put this all on you, I wanted to go in as well. I should have listened to my gut and called it off. Especially after we had a hard time fighting off the undead outside of the dungeon. Anyway, let's get out of here and get some rest, I'm beat. Fiona eventually nodded, finally looking away from the rubble covering the dungeon entrance. I understood her desire to grow stronger, but some things just weren't worth it. I'm sure we would come across another horde dungeon eventually. Hopefully one of a lower level. Chapter 167, On the Move. Seeing as the dungeon was a bust, Fiona and I returned to the fortress and decided to see what was across the plains. It was certainly the largest single terrain feature I had ever seen and seemed almost endless as we flew across it day after day. Every few miles would be small clumps of the gorelephants, grazing away on the tall grass, but little else. The only other thing of note were the errant boulders or small ruins we flew over, now that we knew what to look for. Even the largest terrain feature consisted of only a small hill, maybe 5 feet tall. It made me wonder what was even worth protecting out in such a desolate area that necessitated that lost legion or the ruins. Other than that one horde dungeon, there hadn't even been another dungeon in sight, or nothing to show they were around. We checked every notable landmark we came across to be sure. The landmass also gave me a new sense of scale for how big Earth had grown. I knew a bunch of other worlds and bits of worlds had been smashed together, but if just this one plane was as large as half the United States, it was seriously mind-boggling how much space there was now. A person could lose themselves in just the new areas and probably not visit everything during their lifetime. The 4th day was when I finally saw a change in the landscape. The endless field of grass was finally making way for hot springs that released steam into the late afternoon air. It wasn't the only change, however. Beyond a dozen or so tiers of hot springs was a town, the walls clearly visible from miles off. It was such a surprise after so long seeing nothing that I hadn't even thought to engage the cloak on the fortress, as we had been conserving power across the grassland. That proved to be a mistake as I spotted a group of armed people storming out of the town and down a winding road toward our direction. "I see we are making more friends," Fiona quipped. "Yeah, seems like a trend with me. I say we ignore the locals and be on our way. I could go check the city out," she offered. I mulled over the offer for a bit before nodding. "All right, but hold on to the token, since you can no longer locate me as your bond is gone, you'll need it to find the fortress. I'll try to find a secluded place to set down, but I'm not seeing anything close by." "Fair enough, see you in a few days." Before she vanished through the bomb hole, I shouted a word of warning. "Don't get into trouble, I don't want to have to come to find you." She gave me a jaunty salute and dropped into the tube, disappearing from view. I sealed up the hole and engaged the stealth system, changing direction right after to lose my pursuers. Fiona dropped through the hole with nervous excitement. In her old life, she hadn't been much of a stealthy person, no real need for it as a town guard. But she had grown to like stalking from the shadows and being able to slip away unnoticed. That feeling had only been tempered by the ever-present compulsion to return to her companion. It slowly ebbed as she leveled and almost completely went away when she first gained the ability to retake mortal form. She was thankful that Paul was generous enough to allow her freedom during this time. But the feeling always returned, making her antsy until she returned to his side. It left her conflicted because she loved Martin, but couldn't be separated from Paul. That was until she hit level 20. When that happened, the feeling went away completely, and for the first time in half a year, she felt free. She didn't tell Paul this, mainly because she didn't want to hurt his feelings, or make him relapse into the bottomless pit of despair he had been in when she first returned. So instead she made herself a good friend and continued traveling with him during this latest urge to grow stronger and protect everyone. She knew it was partly brought on by what happened with that Javier person. She understood the reasoning behind his drive, but it was misplaced. If he only stopped and thought about it, he would realize that his friends could take care of themselves. Her musing stopped as she floated near the group of humans that had come to intercept the fortress. They were milling about on horses, looking around in concern to try and spot the fortress. They would have better luck picking out a single blade of grass in the endless plains, she thought ruefully. She did note that they were wary about entering the grassland at all, remaining near the pools instead. Without an identification ability, she was unable to determine levels or classes in the group clustered below. So she remained high enough out of their range to avoid any possible detection herself. True invisibility said she was invisible from all forms of detection, but she knew there were ways around any supposed skill. Another ghost trap, for example, didn't need to detect her in her current form, it would simply trap her inside. She wasn't as concerned about those anymore. But the thought of being trapped still gave her goosebumps, so she played it safe and followed the group back to the city as they kept an eye out for anything out of the ordinary. Muget scanned the sky a final time with concern before heading back for the city. He knew the chief would not be happy that the object had vanished. Muget found it troubling enough himself that it had appeared from the endless grasses. Ever since the city had appeared in this new world, his people had been hesitant to explore their surroundings very far. The hot springs were a comfort as they allowed the city a feeling of safety from the massive beasts of the plains. But trying to hunt those creatures turned out to be a death sentence. They had killed the previous spear. That one ill-fated trip had cost 4 other men their lives and thrust Muget into the spear position well before he was ready. Now there was the ill omen of the floating and disappearing rock. It was almost too much for him to take, and he had to calm his racing heart by taking slow deep breaths and mentally reminding himself that he had strong allies to back him up. "Spear. Why are you back so soon? What of the object?" someone demanded as he passed through the gate. Muget winced, not having expected the chief to debase himself so far as to meet him at the gate. He had hoped to put off reporting to the man for a few hours, but it seems like that was no longer an option. "Apologies, Chief, by the time we made it down the path toward the endless grass, the object had vanished from sight. We attempted to locate it using a few spells but were unable to find it in the vicinity. Perhaps it was just a strange mirage." Muget offered weakly. "A mirage, you say?" The man seemed to chew over Muget's words. "Yes, obviously a mirage. Our city is perfectly protected behind our walls and with our stout warriors," he announced loudly, playing it up for the gathered crowd. There was a tentative round of applause from the crowd as Muget bowed awkwardly, not really understanding what was going on. Obviously, the object was not a mirage, so why did the chief agree with him? Now, you men must be tired from your activities. Muget, we haven't spoken in person since you took over the spear position. How about you join me and my wife for dinner tonight? I like to get to know the people defending the city. Muget bowed again. It would be an honor, Chief Horror. The chief gave a curt nod and walked off. With his vacancy, the crowd slowly left. Muget heard some whisperings about how the chief was a fool and they were all doomed, but he kept that information to himself. Fiona had easily followed the group of men back to the town. She found the interactions with the town leader to be a bit bizarre but chalked it up to not wanting to panic the townsfolk. Already she could sense heightened tension in the air. It was little things, people jumping at unknown sounds, furtive looks, and avoiding any dark corner like their life depended on it. She was curious to find out more but chose to follow this Muget fellow around, seeing as he might lead to information from the source. There was very little in the way of chatter between Muget and the men with him. Once they reached a stable, they tied up their horses and all went their separate ways. Fiona watched Muget stand there for a bit, eyeing his horse and the gate with longing. Eventually, the man let out a quiet sigh and walked off. What is up with this town, she wondered. The man didn't do much, he wandered to a small home, cleaned up, and headed back out. It wasn't hard to determine his destination. It was the largest house in the village, placed on a small rise to make it seem even grander. The homes in the village had large peaked roofs covered in tiles that sloped steeply and had a large ridge running along the center that dipped down sharply on either side and ended in large overhangs that covered a walkway along the entire second floor. Fiona had seen similar architecture in some of the books Martin had collected and recalled they were Japanese in design. These buildings weren't quite the same but were of a similar design. A well-manicured garden of stones and shrubs surrounded the property, making it feel majestic, if a bit out of place amongst the smaller homes of the lower class in the city. She understood a castle when she saw it though, even if its form was completely different. The man named Muget followed a servant as she ushered him around the first floor walkway and toward the back of the property. Lush walls covered in some sort of vine blocked out the sights and noise of the city. And in the center of the rock garden was a small gazebo that mimicked the architecture of the main house but with 4 roof sections coming to a central point. Under that gazebo sat the chief. There was a table, set with 2 plates but 3 seats. Muget wanted to leave as soon as he saw the table setting. This was obviously not a social visit. It was only confirmed a moment later when the silent one pulled out a chair with an empty placing and motioned him to sit. He had no choice but to comply as he took the seat. Good, now that you're here we can discuss matters frankly, the chief stated in an unfriendly tone. Muget just swallowed a lump in his throat and remained quiet. You almost made me look like a fool out there today. You best watch your tone or I will have you replaced. Muget knew the man couldn't legally take his position from him but there were other ways to handle that. Now, what of the flying stone, and don't get flippant with me. Muget relayed everything he and his men had witnessed, which wasn't much. As soon as it was spotted his men saddled horses and rode out to challenge it. About halfway there, the thing simply vanished from the sky and they couldn't find it again so they rode back. The chief was about to respond when a small wind chime tinkled. Muget didn't think anything of it but the chief looked over in puzzlement. When it tinkled again he stood up, throwing his chair back. Who's there? Show yourself. Fiona had fled the estate as soon as she realized she was discovered. How the little chime had detected her, she didn't know but she had a good estimation on how close she could get to it before it went off now, if she chose to go back. She didn't feel like it was important at this moment and instead flitted about the town listening to different conversations. Chapter 168, A Town on the Edge. It soon became clear to Fiona that something was hunting the citizens of the town. It's why they avoided dark alleys, looked about in trepidation, and jumped at noises. It seemed like the chief was trying to keep this information contained but rumors had spiraled out of his control after people started going missing. Seeing as she was in a unique position, she decided to float over the city for a night to see what showed up. Most people were smart and locked themselves in at night, not braving the uncertain streets. But there were always a few fools. On this night it was a drunk man. She watched him stumble past the mouth of an alley and something dark reached out and pulled him in with a scream. She was already racing to that alley to see if she could stop whatever this thing was but by the time she arrived the man and whatever had taken him was gone. The only thing that remained was a few drops of blood to show what had transpired. Fiona decided she may be over her head alone, so she raced out of town to locate Paul and the fortress. I know you told me about the issue, but can you explain this creatures to me again? I asked as we walked toward the town. I went a bit overkill with hiding the fortress, and we were over a day's flight from the town in a small forest. I hadn't seen any roads on my way south from the town, so figured it was safe enough for a few weeks, seeing as I had activated the defenses. Not much to tell, I was quite a distance away when it struck. Dark clawed hands reached out from an alley and pulled the man in, and by the time I got there it was gone. I scratched my stubble and thought. Fair enough. What about this chief or the spear person? The chief is a typical politician as far as I could tell. He seemed more concerned about keeping up appearances than trying to resolve the issue. But I could be wrong from the few minutes I was able to listen in. As for Muget the spear, which I assume is something like a guard captain, he seemed a bit out of his depth. What do you think their response will be when they see us coming? They are on edge with the attacks within the city, so probably pretty aggressively. I couldn't tell you what level any of them were, but you might want to take a soft touch when we approach, she stated directly. I can have a soft touch, I argued back. She just snorted. It took 2 days of walking before the town appeared on the horizon. There had been a few monster attacks, but nothing above level 10. Certainly nothing like the gorelephants that lived below the hills. From my experience, the surrounding ecosystem was usually a good indicator of average level. Our approach didn't go unnoticed for long as a group of 5 men rode out to meet us. I still had my second class hidden and my main class set to 18, but with Fiona beside me, there wasn't any way of hiding her current level. We stopped and waited for the men to approach. My new armor was stored and I had my old set equipped, which still sported some damage from previous fights. I figured it would make me look a bit less intimidating. The men circled around us, coming to a stop after they had us surrounded but at quite a distance. They were all wearing some boiled leather armor with plates of metal riveted over sensitive areas of the body. The design more closely resembled my mantle of Ouroboros armor than my Mage Bane armor that I was currently wearing, with its more brigandine style made from small fingers of metal. Who are you and why are you coming toward Huron? Fiona had described Muget to me, so I knew the man talking was him. We were traveling through the area and spotted the town. We figured we could stop for supplies and rest a few days before we continue, I replied. The man looked dubious at my statement but didn't call me on it. His eyes did widen a bit at seeing Fiona, and I figured he was checking her level. I chose to do the same. Muget Huranian Spearman level 15. I was surprised at his level, expecting something closer to 10. His other men weren't far behind, ranging from 13 to 15 to match him. Well, far be it from me to turn away travelers. Where do you hail from, if I may ask? I'm Paul, and we come from a town called St. June, I replied. Technically true. I'm not familiar with that city. Are you a local from this world? I am, but my friend, Fiona, here is not, I added, gesturing to Fiona. Well met, my name is Muget. Our town doesn't have much to offer, but hospitality is not among the things we lack. Our chief may summon you to meet with him, as you are the first travelers we have encountered since we were transported to this world. I hope this is acceptable. That will be fine, Fiona replied. The man nodded slightly and his men put up their weapons but kept an eye on us as we moved as a group toward the town in the distance. A few were eyeing Fiona with a bit more than weariness. I wanted to laugh at that, picturing one of them trying to make a move on her, but thought better of it with how tense these people were. As we rode through the gate, the atmosphere inside was even worse than Fiona had stated. Going by her expression, it had changed dramatically in the few days we had been gone. Please follow me, Muget beckoned after he had dropped off his horse at the stable. We do not have an inn, so you and your traveling companion may stay at my house. That's kind of you, but we couldn't possibly impose, Fiona replied. Nonsense, what sort of host would I be if I failed to find adequate lodging for guests? You need not worry about a wife or children bothering you, as I am unmarried. I wasn't surprised at that, seeing as the guy didn't look much older than 20. With the system in place, there wasn't a rush to marry, as you could live a long healthy life in almost peak condition. The other men had gone their separate way after the stable, so I chose this time to spring my question on Muget. Muget, is there something you aren't telling us? The people of your city seem a bit tense. I saw Muget's eyes flicker over to me, but he kept his head facing forward. It took him a minute to respond, uncertain if whether he should tell us. We have been having some issues in town during the night. Oh, what sort of issues? I inquired further, hoping he would tell us himself. An even longer pause followed that question as he glanced around. "Perhaps I will tell you over dinner," he politely replied. I nodded, keeping an eye on the townsfolk as we walked. It was weird watching people walk in groups, but avoiding any shadowy corner. Even Muget wasn't immune to the fear as he crossed over streets instead of crossing in front of alleys. I glanced into one of these dark alleys but saw nothing out of the ordinary. I was starting to build a hypothesis about what could be snatching people though. Some form of shadow creature seemed the most likely culprit, but it was too soon to tell. It had to be at least intelligent, as it would ambush people from what Fiona was able to discover. Soon our walk ended in front of a modest building sharing the same Japanese-style decor as the rest of the town sported. I had never been to Japan personally, but I had seen the buildings in books and on TV, and the design looked slightly off. Maybe it was the way the locals dressed in a more old Roman toga style than Japanese kimonos. I guess it made sense since this wasn't a Japanese building. It did tell me that this region was relatively warm year-round. At least before the merging of our world with part of theirs. But we had to be closer to the equator, so it probably would stay that way. Then again, I had no idea if the entire continent was shifted from its previous position. The farthest north I had been was where I was camping when everything went to shit. I knew north was still north as my compass in the fortress worked properly. It gave me a lot to think about and an itch to find out. Still, I had commitments at the moment that I couldn't just shove off on my friends. Once those were taken care of, then perhaps. Muget's home was pretty Spartan. There was a kitchen with a dining table that could fit four if you didn't mind being elbow to elbow. A bedroom, separated by a linen sheet as a door, and a central area that contained the kitchen and dining room were the only two rooms in the dwelling. I apologize for the lack of amenities. I have bedding that both of you can use. It doesn't get very cold at night, so a light blanket should keep you warm. The outhouse is out back, and if you don't mind eating outside, we can sit at the table in my backyard while we dine. That will be fine, Muget, you have been more than generous, I offered. The man gave a slight bow. Very well, I will prepare dinner. It didn't take long for Muget to cook a stew-type dish, pulling fresh ingredients from a storage ring on his hand. His yard wasn't as ostentatious as Fiona said the chief's was, but it was well cared for, with a circular table in the center of a rainbow-colored rock garden. A small stream ran through the back, separating his house from the one across. "You have quite the lovely house," Fiona stated. It was true. While small and simple, it put my old house back north to shame. "You are too kind. I only wish I could spend more time relaxing here. Sitting outside and enjoying a meal is one of my favorite activities. But being the spear, I have other responsibilities." "Spear?" I inquired. He smiled. "A fancy name, but I believe most cultures just refer to it as a guard captain or commander. It just means I will be the tip of the weapon defending our city. But enough about me. As a local from this world, I am much more interested in your journey so far. Judging by both of your levels, it must have been quite harrowing." I relayed a couple of the stories of our adventures together. The man seemed genuinely interested in what happened beyond his small town. Well, it was small in comparison to Houston or St. June, but it was larger than Armin had been. "That is fascinating. I wish I could explore this new world." "Why can't you?" I asked in confusion. He let out a sigh. "My position is for life, to give it up is to be labeled a traitor and a coward. Plus I would be leaving the people without a spear. The knowledge of that alone would eat at me." "Okay, fair enough. So about these issues, your town is suffering?" I asked, changing the subject. It seemed he was about to tell us when his eyes widened and he stood up. "Silent One, what do I owe the honor of your visit?" I turned around to see a slight woman walk gracefully from the house, holding a rolled parchment. Without saying anything, she handed it to Muget with an imperceptible bow, before turning to Fiona and me, handing one to each of us in turn. I was curious to see what sort of person made Muget so deferential, so I used identify. "Silent One?" I raised an eyebrow at the obviously hidden information and received a smirk from the woman in reply, that disappeared almost instantly. "We are being summoned to the chiefs to attend dinner." "I apologize, I should have seen this possibility happening tonight." "That's fine, Muget, we would be happy to meet with your chief." "Yeah, Muget, no worries, your dinner was lovely though," Fiona added. It seemed our time pumping Muget for information was over, time to see what the chief was willing to reveal to us. Chapter 169, Vetting Process. The three of us followed the silent woman as she led us to the chief's residence. It was easy to tell how opulent the place was, even more so than Fiona's description. I noticed pillars carved from some sort of ivory. Just the amount of detail work put into items meant to hold up a roof was beyond the norm. At first, I thought they looked a little like runes, but I felt no magical power emanating from them. There also wasn't any connecting structure to the designs, almost like it was random. I knew true randomness wouldn't look as good as this effect though. Besides the intricately carved columns, there were the golden filigreed beams overhead. The design was more subdued there, as it ran across the beams like branches, with leaves of gold. I didn't quite understand why someone would build that much detail into something most people would overlook, but I could at least admire the craftsmanship that went into the design. The outer walls of the building were wooden paneled and displayed a vibrant mural of mountains, rivers, and flowering trees that tied in with the golden filigree overhead. I felt something slightly magical from the mural, and maybe that would explain how it looked to be freshly painted when you could tell the building was old. Like really old. If you've ever visited ancient landmarks, you know the feeling. We came around the side of the house and into a sprawling backyard. Blindingly white stone made up the majority of the rock garden, only broken by pure black boulders that sat as focal points to contrast the whole thing. Tall walls surrounded the area, covered in thick vines, with the center of the garden being occupied by the gazebo that Fiona mentioned. After seeing the detail on the house, the gazebo was almost bland by comparison. Thin and smoothly polished white and black speckled columns of marble supported the four sides. The roof was a similar dark grey clay tile as the main house. But the floor was what really caught my eye. It wouldn't have been clear to someone who hadn't had a class designed to draw magical circles, but thanks to my acquisition of the hex circle skill, even though I got rid of it, I could see the magical diagram for what it was. I had no idea what it did, but I knew it was magical in nature. The design was inlaid into the creamy white stone floor in silver geometric lines. A table with a slightly overweight man sat in the center of the design. Around that table sat 4 chairs of a rather subpar design compared to everything else. We each took a seat at the round table, Muget to the left of the chief, Fiona off to his right, and me directly across from him. "Thank you for accepting my invitation," the man added after we sat. I didn't think our invitation was optional but chose to remain quiet on the subject. "We can talk over food," the man added, picking up a small silver bell and giving it 1 ring. 4 women appeared from a doorway carrying trays of food. To me, they all looked like younger versions of the Silent One. None of them spoke, and as soon as they set the trays down in front of us, they disappeared back into the house, making the resemblance even eerier. "Please, enjoy what little we have to offer," the chief gestured, removing the clay cover from his plate. I shrugged, might as well dig in. I wasn't too concerned about being poisoned with my stats and titles. I removed my cover as well, revealing 3 dishes. One looked like a thin soup or broth. Then there was the meat, shaped like a cube and sitting in a vibrant red sauce. The last was a small confection that looked to be made from fruit. It smelled wonderful. "So, I hear you two are from a far-off town," the chief asked as he sipped on his thin soup. "I suppose so. That is fascinating. We don't get many visitors to this secluded area, but that was before we were plucked from our world. I think you are the first to visit us since we arrived. How long did you have to travel to get here?" "Maybe a week," I replied, not wanting him to know just how long it took to get to his village. "We came from a town called St. June." That is a name I am unfamiliar with. Was it a town in your world?" I nodded as I sipped on the spicy broth mixture. It was time to ask some questions of my own. "Muget told us your town is having some sort of issue." "Oh," the chief said, turning to face Muget, who shrank in his seat. He shouldn't have burdened travelers such as yourself with our worries. But he spoke the truth. "Is there anything we can do to help?" Fiona asked. The man paused for a moment while he pondered the offer. "Perhaps. We can discuss it further after our meal. I feel like the specifics may limit your appetite." The rest of the meal was filled with small talk, but any time I tried to bring the subject back around to the city, the chief waved off my question or changed the subject. But the meal had come to an end, and I was a bit sad for that fact considering how delicious everything had been. Martin would have loved to get tips from the cooks. "Now, before you start flooding me with questions, there is a small issue that needs to be taken care of," the chief stated seriously. "Oh, and what is that?" I asked in curiosity, my mind still lamenting the end of the meal. Perhaps if I had been paying more attention I wouldn't have been so surprised by the next action. A bubble of teal energy radiated out from the center of the room, throwing me and Muget from our seats and into the stone garden beyond. Fiona and the chief were still sitting at the table, the chief with a look of resolve, and Fiona one of surprise. I could tell something was wrong as Fiona hadn't moved from her seated position. Before I hit the ground, mantle of Ouroboros appeared on my body and dominion and destruction appeared in my hand. I rolled as I hit the rocks, coming up in a crouched position and looking around. Mugat was also rising and I saw one of the silent ones standing nearby, holding a spear. When I turned around, I saw one near me as well, but she was holding a straight sword with a long tassel through a rung in the pommel. I was going to demand what was going on when I received a prompt. Silent One wishes to challenge you to a duel. Accept Y/N. I took a moment to take in what was going on, realizing this was the same woman that we had followed to the mansion. I used identify on her again out of habit and found her obfuscation turned off. Mundaying Blade Dancer / Wind Spirit 21/10. My eyes widened at this and she smiled in reply. Not the smirk of before, but a genuinely happy smile. I turned back toward the gazebo and saw Fiona and the chief talking about something. She didn't seem in danger, so I decided to see what this duel was all about, selecting yes. There was a tinkling sound of laughter that flowed through the courtyard as Mundaying took up a fighting stance, her blade held low and behind her. My track record with fighting close combat classes was not exactly stellar, but I was going to give it my all. If they had wanted to kill me they would have done it. No, this seemed more like some sort of test. What is the meaning of this? Fiona yelled as the weird shield sprang into place, shoving Paul and Mugat out from under the gazebo. Please calm yourself, Miss Fiona, it is a simple test to see if they are worthy of the knowledge I am willing to impart. Oh, and why am I still inside the bubble, and why can't I move? I will release you, but please don't try to leave or harm me, it will only cause the Silent Ones to seek vengeance and neither of us wants that. As for why you weren't pushed out, that has to do with your spiritual connection. What does that have to do with anything? The chief grimaced. I apologize if this is rude behavior. But the information I contain could lead to the death of this entire town if given to the wrong person. When I saw your class, I had hoped we could reach an understanding. But before that can happen, everyone here must be vetted. No permanent harm will befall either of them. If they fail the duel, I will simply ask them, and you to leave our town. I avoided a quick slash of Mundaying's sword that had been aimed as an upward slice toward my chin. She deftly weaved her way back out of my reach as I struggled to try and even strike at her with my staff. It was like trying to fight a plastic bag twisting in the wind, where every swipe caused it to change direction. The smaller woman swirled just beyond a quick slash of my staff, only a faint hint of frost coating her flowing dress. The woman's smile had gone from simple joy to ear-splittingly happy as our fight went on. She was obviously enjoying the challenge, and heck, I was enjoying it more than I should be considering the actions that led up to the duel. I learned early on that magic fired at her was a lost cause. She would weave out of the way of arcane bolts like a matador avoiding a charging bull. She used no spells that I could determine, meaning most of her abilities were tied to her fighting style, similar to Fiona. While their first classes were similar, the outcome was drastically different. Fiona's was more about controlling the forces of a fight and getting them to move how she wanted. And Mundaying's were more about avoidance and getting within your opponent's reach to strike a vital blow. Somehow Mundaying's style was much more fluid, but that could be due to her secondary class. I attempted to intercept her blade with my staff. Mundaying didn't cross swords or attempt to block, she simply avoided the attack altogether, following it up with a quick stab to my side. I jerked sideways in pain, getting another slice across the arm as she danced away again. I had been ready for this one, using Earth Fist to try and trip her up. It slowed her down, but she deftly avoided the obstacle, but it gave me time to swing my staff around, dealing my first blow to the lithe woman. The lion head met her side with all the power I could muster. The hit was solid, but instead of being thrown across the courtyard, the woman simply floated farther away before landing. She did stop to look at the ice coating her dress. I swear if the woman could have smiled wider she would have. Her stance changed, as she slightly crouched side on toward me, one hand on her sword and the other on the end of the pommel as the tip faced me. I knew a build-up attack when I saw it, activating my wings only a moment before the air around her stirred. She shot forward like a bullet, her sword forced forward even faster by the hand at the back. I barely avoided the attack as I activated Blink Step and shot into the air. There was a crack of displaced air as her attack finished. The side of the yard was in disarray as a straight line of destruction lanced through where I had been standing a moment ago. I didn't have time to be shocked as the icy water dripped from the ends of my staff. I whipped a large crescent in her direction with stunning gust. Probably not the best use against a wind spirit, I realized. There was a tinkling giggle on the wind again as the attack veered harmlessly away from her and she took up another fighting stance. She stood with her eyes closed and the flat of the blade against her forehead a moment before she ripped it down with impressive speed. I felt a massive burst of wind smash into my back and flatten me into the garden with little warning. I had to struggle against the buffeting winds just to stand, but flying was simply not possible. So far she was getting the better of me in combat, but her attacks were doing little damage thanks to my armor. Ranged abilities were going to be of little use against someone who could avoid them or slap them out of the air with little effort. That meant fighting her up close. Seeing as I had no other options, I activated charge. She began to move almost before I did, attempting to avoid my attack. But I activated time shutter, giving me just enough time to strike her with the dragon end of my staff. She had a surprised look on her face as a thick layer of ice coated her midsection. For most opponents that would have been game over, but she fought on. I took 2 long gashes and 3 more stab wounds before I was finally able to deplete her health to the point that the duel ended. I fell down panting from the exertion of the fight. Mundaying only gave me a slight bow in deference. Her face now returned to a completely neutral expression with only a hint of mirth still dancing in her eyes. She looked completely fine, like it hadn't even been a mild workout for her. I looked to Muget to see how he was faring. It seemed his combatant was earth-based as the smaller clone of Mundaying moved slowly but deliberately, her spear striking out with immense strength. Eventually, he too overcame his challenge and the shield around the chief dropped. I am sorry for the theatrics, but they were necessary, as you will learn shortly. Now we can discuss what ails the town. Chapter 170, The Lies Beneath. I had to stop myself from leaping across the table and throttling the older man on the far side. It was a close thing, my rage barely kept in check by an almost imperceptible shake of Fiona's head. I didn't sit either, preferring to remain standing, my armor and weapon at the ready. I knew most of it was leftover adrenaline from my fight, but there was always the simmering pot of anger below the surface. It had been so long since I let my emotions out that I was ready to burst. I knew it wasn't healthy, but after Javier's betrayal, it was going to be difficult to work my way back to normal. That had been another reason for this trip. Mindless violence helped me get a grip on the caged beast and relieve some of the pressure. Apparently not enough if I was this wound up after what amounted to a friendly duel, even if it was done without consulting either of us. I understand your anger, outsider, but in order for you to help us, I need to tell you something only privileged people are allowed to learn. And why would I bother helping you after that stunt you just pulled? I asked, heat in my voice. Simple, because you are still standing here. But let me talk first, then you can decide if you truly wish to help, or you can simply be on your way. There will be no condemnation if that is what you chose. Let's hear him out, Paul, Fiona added. Fine, but this better be worth it. I saw Muget pull his chair back to sit next to the table as if nothing had happened. His armor looked rough, but he was uninjured thanks to the match coming to an end. Very well, I will begin, at the beginning. Huron was established 14 generations ago by Huron the Wise, a spiritualist of some repute back in his day. He chose this site, far from other towns or even roads, for one simple reason: an ample supply of spiritual energy. His followers helped establish the small village that grew to what you see today. But somewhere along the line people lost their connection with the local spirits. Well, most people did anyway. As you may have noticed, Mundaying is one of only a handful of people blessed by a spiritual guide. And she only gained that blessing after her rise to level 20. I noticed, I mumbled, glancing at the blonde-haired beauty standing behind the chief and off to the side. The chief ignored my words as he continued his story. We haven't had a truly blessed child in 2 generations, one whose initial class is spirit-touched. Not to say that Mundaying or the others aren't precious, as they certainly are. And not just for their levels, but I will get to that shortly. This decline was noticed 10 generations ago and was thought to be the result of people forgetting why they had chosen this location and their failures to properly revere the spirits in the land around us. Why is this the first I have heard about this? Muget asked, interrupting the chief, who glared back in disapproval. You were not vetted. Now let me speak and you will find out the full reason. Muget grunted in annoyance but otherwise kept quiet. It seemed he wasn't much happier about the situation than I was. As the power of the citizens' defenders waned, we were set upon by other groups. This happened 8 generations ago. The defenders were able to kill off the attackers at great loss to the spiritual experts at the time. That only seemed to hasten the decline of the city. So the remaining spiritualists and the chief got together and locked away the knowledge from those not touched by spirits. Let me guess, the town was betrayed by someone from within, and that's why you were attacked. I cut in. That was the general consensus at the time, as is written in the history every chief and spiritualist receive access to. As the generations lived and died, spiritualists became a minority amongst the populace, then reduced even further to a few hundred, then a few dozen. Today our city only boasts 5. Even I am not amongst those vaunted few and am privy to this information only due to my title. That sucks and all, but that doesn't explain your actions, I said flatly. I am getting there, the man snapped back. When I saw your friend's class, I thought perhaps you could help. But to help I first needed to relay this story. And before that could happen I needed to vet your skills as per rules set down and bound by magic long before my grandfather's great-grandfather walked among the living. All right, fair enough. So, what do you think we can do to help, considering you went through all this trouble? The thing attacking people in the streets is a spirit of shadow, or so I am told by the Silent Ones. It is searching for a host. It is the first spirit to actively seek a host since our earliest records. There were magical guides in place to prevent this sort of single-minded aggression from spirits, but over time the wards have fallen into disrepair, all except a handful. We were hoping you and your friend could help guide this enraged spirit into one of these areas so we can determine who amongst our populace might be a fitting host. That seems a bit like slavery, and what makes you think any of your people would fit these criteria anyway? It is hardly slavery. A spirit and a mortal are like two sides of the same coin. For one to be here, the other must as well, yet we know not who it is. Someone young and without a class would be the most likely suspect, but I can't send out children to be slaughtered wantonly by this feral spirit. If our array was still fully functional, the spirit and child would be able to sense each other and merge as one. If it's so dangerous, why not kill it and be done with it? I asked. The chief and Mundaying both flinched back as if I had slapped them. That would have dire consequences for everyone within this town. While the spirits no longer join with the citizens, they still slumber nearby within their own domains. They would clearly sense the death of one of their own kind and replace one problem with many, many more. Our best guess is our transfer to this world awoke one and caused it to seek out its other half. Honestly, I saw more spirits as a victory for the town. It meant more spirits to find bodies to inhabit. Then again, without these magical arrays, it would likely lead to many people dying before these spirits found what they were after. It also made me think their reverence toward the spirits was part of their initial problem. If the spirits had all gone to sleep, it was no wonder they weren't bonding with anyone. It also explained why they only showed themselves to higher-level people. Wait! Did that mean they forced Mugat to fight someone far above his level? How did he even win then? Unless she was only fighting at her strength to match his. Did that also mean Mundaying was sandbagging me? I looked over at the woman and she gave me a small smirk in return. Damn it, now I wanted a rematch while not hiding my full levels. If it can't be killed, how do you propose we drive it into these zones? And why haven't you tried doing that yourself? Fiona asked a question I dearly wanted an answer for. The chief looked uncomfortable at this question, which was good. If he answered it, it meant he was serious about needing our help. If he didn't, well, we would be on our way. We tried, and almost succeeded. But this spirit isn't native to our homeland like the previous spirits I mentioned. While spirits seem to inhabit the same extra-dimensional space, some can only enter into very specific worlds. This quirk has been known long before this city was established. It was because of this quirk that this land was so valued by the spiritualist founder. It was an open font for many different spirits, all capable of entering into our realm. Thankfully this connection wasn't cut off when our existence was uprooted and moved here. In fact, it seems like more spiritual channels have opened, allowing for never-before-seen spirits to come and go as they please. The man paused to think about his next words as I watched him. While we know what a shadow spirit is, it is one of the more difficult spirits to capture, as you might imagine. Able to slip away into the smallest shadow and reappear anywhere within the city. That is one reason I have had to deploy these chimes, he said, gesturing to an innocuous-looking wind chime. It can sense if hidden spirits get too close. A few days ago we had a visit from this hidden spirit. At the time Fiona held up her hand, halting the man's speech. I wasn't sure she should admit to being that hidden spirit, but it was her choice. That was me. I was scouting your town, she stated. You? But how? He asked incredulously. She took that cue to vanish from view, reappearing at the other end of the table only seconds later. The chimes tinkled softly the entire time she was invisible. One of my many skills related to my spiritual class, she replied simply, walking back around the table to take her seat next to the shocked man and smiling Monday Ying. Well. Wait, does that mean you came from the Flying Rock? He asked in astonishment. She nodded, not offering any more information on the matter. I'm not sure if this will help any, but it can't hurt. Our main issue is corralling the spirit without getting the town riled up. It's bad enough they already suspect something and think I am doing nothing to resolve the issue, he said, looking toward Muget. Muget flinched slightly in his chair. I was aware of what had happened at the gate thanks to Fiona's report, so understood why the man was being defensive. You're asking for a lot, Chief. You want us to help wrangle an almost impossible to capture spirit, without killing it or alerting the town to its presence. All while offering little in return. Now I consider myself a decent fighter, but my skill set doesn't lie in hunting down spirits or capturing them. And I doubt Fiona would have much more advantage in that regard. So, why us? I understand your reticence and didn't expect you to have a skill set to help aid our endeavors. But since this spirit is from your world, so to speak, it should be drawn to your friend here. At least more so than it was with our silent ones, he replied. I noticed he didn't answer my question about what he was offering in return. So you want to use her as bait? The man bristled. I wouldn't use such a vulgar term to describe what we are doing, but essentially yes. She will act as a beacon to help draw the spirit out until it is safely within our still active wards. Call it what you will, she is bait. What if this spirit decides to attack her? That shouldn't happen. The wards should curb the anger of the spirit until we can find the chosen. But didn't you just say that your wards are failing? What if you only manage to capture an angry spirit and the part that is supposed to pacify it is broken? What then? The man spluttered but didn't have an answer. Fiona, this is your call, since you're the one that's going to be in danger here. Could you excuse us for a moment? I need to converse with my friend alone. She said, standing up and walking toward the front of the house and out of sight. I got up and followed her. Well? I asked as we were far enough out of earshot, not to be heard. It's a risk, I won't deny that. But what? The man hasn't even offered anything in return. I'm not even sure what he has to offer that would make this worth our while. She shrugged, we just need to find out. It seems they are desperate for this spirit to save their dying orders, so to speak. Besides, if I'm in danger I could use your staff, she whispered the last part, barely loud enough for me to hear. I queried my eyebrows at this. You sure? It should be fine as long as I don't hit myself with it, not that I'll be all that graceful, but still, I can take a hit or two. All right, as I said, it's your decision. Let's get back before they think we changed our minds then. I'll let you negotiate the reward.